Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Animal Training Fundamentals with Barbara Heidenreich. Glad to have you here. And we're going to explore another interesting topic. I've called this one, This is Uncomfortable. And you may be wondering, what the heck does that mean? Well, it was kind of inspired by the fact that I've got something coming up that I have described as uncomfortable, I guess, to a few colleagues, because it's good and it's also uncomfortable. It's a really lovely speaking opportunity, actually, but it's putting a little pressure on me because it's going to be a very large audience and people who I hope will receive the presentation very well. I want to do a very good job, but it makes me feel a little uncomfortable. So it made me think about how there are situations with our animals that might seem uncomfortable for animals as well. And it made me think about, what do we do as animal trainers when we think our animals are going to be uncomfortable, or maybe they're doing things that make us think they're uncomfortable. So it got me thinking this might be a good topic for a podcast. So let's go ahead and dive into the topic of, what do you do when things are uncomfortable? So what is this big event that has me thinking so much about something uncomfortable? Well, it's actually not that bad. It's actually a good thing, like I said. I'm speaking at the European Association of Zoos and Aquarium Conference coming up in September, and I get to be a part of a really amazing plenary, the Welfare Plenary, that is going to be on Saturday, September 16th from 10:30 to 12:30 if you're going to be in attendance. And our Welfare Plenary is really all about emotions. And to tell you a little bit more about it, the description of our whole plenary is how to help zoo professionals understand, measure, and transform the emotional welfare of animals through behavior. Isn't that cool? And my particular topic is animal training that transforms and measures emotional welfare. There's a whole bunch of other great speakers participating in this plenary, so I'm not the only one. But my topic in particular is I'm pretty excited to share with you. It's really based on the wonderful work of Israel Gold Diamond and Joe Lang and Paul Andranis. So some of you may be familiar with that work, but I'm sharing how it applies to the work that we do with animals. And so, of course, I want to do a great job. I want to represent those wonderful mentors as best I can and help share that information very well. And the really cool thing about the plenary is that there's no overlapping presentations at the same time. So if we're lucky and people are not too exhausted by the end of the conference, hopefully most of the delegates will be there in attendance for our plenary. So that means we'll have a lot of people in attendance. And so I want to make sure I do a good job. So there's a part of me that's a little concerned, right? I'm a little uncomfortable, but I'm also super excited. So this actually really ties in with the presentation that I'm giving. And as we get going in this podcast here, you're going to see why. But first, what that means is we need to maybe go into a little bit of what we mean by uncomfortable, right? The word uncomfortable is just a label, right? It's a label for an emotion that I happen to be feeling about speaking at this plenary. But we also might use it to describe some other things when we talk about animals and animal training. So when I talk about animals, uncomfortable might mean painful. It might mean, and what do I mean by painful? I mean something that may cause injury to tissue, that may stimulate the nervous system in a particular way. I might also mean maybe it's like physically demanding to the animal. Maybe it puts demands on the strength of the animal, on its balance, on its coordination, on its stamina. So that might be another way that I'm referring to uncomfortable. And maybe it's beyond the skill set or the competency of the animal. So maybe the animal doesn't really have fluency in a particular behavior that we're working on, or maybe it doesn't really have experience doing that behavior in a particular environment where I'm asking it to do this behavior. So I'm asking it to do something beyond its competency level. And then another thing I had been thinking about this is sometimes we think something is going to be uncomfortable for the animal, but maybe it's not really uncomfortable for the animal at all. What we have to remember to do is observe that animal and watch its behavior to really collect information. What are the behaviors we observe that give us information that the animal is uncomfortable? And this is one of those areas where degrees of freedom become really important, because if the animal has only one way to access the desired outcome, that reinforcer, like if it has only one way to escape if it's negative reinforcement, or one behavior that it can do to get away from the aversive condition, or only one way to access the appetitive, then that kind of means it's being coerced into that particular behavior to get that outcome. So that's going to be really important to give us some information there. So important stuff to consider there. And if you don't know stuff about degrees of freedom, I'm going to provide a resource for you at the end where you can learn a little bit more about that. So tying in with that, I was just saying we need to have evidence that something is uncomfortable, because again, uncomfortable is just sort of a label for a private experience. And what we are really looking for is observable, measurable behavior that lets us know something is experiencing these things that I just described, right? So if it's painful, what might tell us that it's painful to the animal? So maybe the animal moves away, maybe the animal tries to avoid contact with something. So like if you had a syringe in your hand and the animal did have bad experiences with syringes in the past, it might move away from that. Or if it saw somebody approach with a dart gun, it might be like, I'm out of here. And then you might look at things like, how does it distribute its weight? Does it not want you to put pressure on something? Or maybe if the lights are really, disturbing to the animal, it may kind of close its eyes because, that bright light, that's making me feel uncomfortable. That's painful to me. I think a really good example for me is when I walk my dog right now, this time of year. There are these little tiny burrs that are everywhere. And so I'll start walking my dog, and if he stops for some reason and doesn't, he's not sniffing something or investigating something, he'll literally stop and freeze in his tracks, and he'll just look at me and he doesn't want to move forward. That's an indicator to me that I need to check his feet. And literally, I think it's almost 99 out of 100 times that there will be a burr stuck to the bottom of one of his feet. And so I literally always check, if he stops dead in his tracks, I check his feet and I will find one of these burrs stuck to the bottom of his feet, because he won't move, because it's creating, I'm assuming creating pain for him, because he won't move forward. And as soon as I take that burr off of his foot, he starts moving forward again and continues with our walk. So there's behavioral evidence that there's pain going on there. Now, if it's physically demanding, maybe we'll see things like the animal leaning against something, or maybe they collapse, or maybe they're breathing heavily, something like that. So an example for me that I've seen is sometimes when I'm working with a facility and they're doing hoof care on a giraffe in a chute, the animal will literally lean against one side of the chute. And so to me, I kind of see that as, the animal's trying to find a way to gain more comfort while they're trying to balance on three legs, and because they don't want to put weight on the one that is having work done on it, because that's not where they distribute the weight. You literally don't want the animal putting weight on that one. You want them to keep their weight off of that one. So I have seen this with several animals that I've worked with, where they literally will lean against the side of the chute. And then another example was working with a geriatric sheep that the farrier had her balancing on three legs for quite a while. And even though she was kind of pushed up against a fence to kind of help provide some support, there eventually came a point where you could see she just was like, I can't do this anymore. And she literally sort of just like her three legs kind of went out from under her, and she just started to kind of lay down because she's like, I can't do this anymore. So to me, that was a pretty good indicator that she's like, I'm uncomfortable. My body is not able to do this anymore. And then when we talk about sort of that beyond the competency of the animal, this is where you may see that stuff where it looks conflicted, as that might be a nice word to describe it, or hesitant to respond. So you may have an animal that maybe under conditions where you've practiced the behavior over and over again, maybe even to the point of fluency, the animal may respond really, really well, quick response to the cue, perfect form, all the things that you would consider a trained behavior. But now let's say you tried it in a new space and the animal doesn't seem to quite give you that quick response, or doesn't respond to the kind of form that you expected. But maybe it kind of tries, it sort of participates, but maybe seems a little slow or maybe a little distracted. I think a nice example of this might be maybe you've trained some really great behaviors that have to do with cooperating in medical care, and then maybe you go to the veterinary clinic and the animal's kind of like, I'm not 100% sure about this, maybe I kind of give you a little bit of it, or I'm a little slow about it, so maybe you've trained your parrot to be comfortable with restraint in a towel, but it doesn't quite complete that behavior at the veterinary hospital. Or maybe it's getting up on a scale, but it's really, really slow about it. So that might be an example of evidence for you that perhaps the animal is not quite comfortable with that. And then when you think about yourself, maybe not being so comfortable with something, that might be that place where you have that same kind of experience, where it might feel like anxiety or discomfort, where you're hesitant. And again, that would be those competing contingencies. So maybe there's this, for me, like I think about this lecture coming up, like on the one hand, I'm super excited. I'm going to get to present some information that I'm really passionate about. I'm really excited about. I think it's really going to help our community do some great things for animals. But this is a relatively new topic for me to talk about. I haven't done lots of lectures on it before, and it's really important to me that I get the information out well and I present the information correctly, because I'm representing the work of other people that I admire very much, and I want to make sure I share it correctly and I credit them correctly and all those things. So there's a part of me that has a lot of pressure on myself, and I want to make sure I do a good job. So there's some competing contingencies for me there, right? Because I want to make sure that I am perfectly prepared. And one of the cool things I've learned in preparing for this lecture is that when we feel an emotion like anxiety, for example, it alerts us to those competing contingencies, that negative reinforcement competing with positive reinforcement. We're going to take a little break to give you your first secret word, and the secret word is burr, B-U-R-R. Secret words are important to remember and submit to show you've listened to this podcast for your professional development. All right, back to the program. So what can I do to help address that situation for myself is I can address my competency. I can do things like practice that presentation over and over and over again so that hopefully I feel really comfortable with the presentation. Now, of course, I may not be practicing that in front of a really big audience like we anticipate when we do the actual plenary, but I can practice it maybe at home by myself privately first, so that hopefully I get my skills down pretty well. And then another thing I might do is I might practice it with maybe some friends and some colleagues that I trust, who can give me some feedback and say, hey, maybe you might want to change this, or I would do this a little bit differently. And then I might practice it with some smaller groups that I trust and feel comfortable with. So I can gradually raise the criteria as I'm feeling more competent and fluent in the information, so that I'm getting more comfortable. And so I'm addressing that negative reinforcement contingency so that hopefully when the day comes that I'm presenting it in front of a larger audience, I've addressed that negative reinforcement contingency as much as possible so that I'm in a better position to have a really good experience when it's time to present that presentation under more challenging conditions. And you may think, how does that relate to animals? Would I ever be in a situation like that with animals? And we are in those situations with animals. And for me, a really relevant example is having trained animals to be animal ambassadors or to be in situations where they're emitting behaviors in front of audiences, we would often start out with training those behaviors with no audience members, with no microphones, with no music. And so we get those behaviors extremely fluent under conditions where the animals can be really successful, where there's no other environmental distractions. The animals do those behaviors so fast, so fluently, and then we gradually start adding small audiences. And usually those small audiences initially would be people that they knew, so staff members. And then we would gradually start adding people that they didn't know. We might even gradually add applause, gradually add the music, gradually add microphones. And so just like me getting used to doing a presentation for a large audience on a subject matter that I'm getting more comfortable with, we would do the same thing for the animal. Make sure the animal knows what behavior it's supposed to do really, really well, and then gradually add in those other factors that are going to be a little bit more challenging, small bits at a time, sort of incrementally. Another way we can think about addressing some of these things that might make an animal uncomfortable is to ask ourselves, must that aversive condition be present? Sometimes these things that are making our animals uncomfortable don't actually need to be there. And I think about situations where maybe there is a specific stimulus that we know the animal is just not comfortable with. It might be a particular person, it might be a particular object, it might be a particular space. You are usually pretty good at identifying what that thing might be, but it may not be relevant to your particular behavior goal. And sometimes we can just remove that thing completely. If you don't need that to be there, then it may not be necessary to spend a whole bunch of time trying to get your animal comfortable with that particular aversive stimulus. So one strategy that is completely valid is just say, I'm not going to worry about having that thing in the environment. We're going to remove that from the environment and move forward from here. Here's another option that I think is sometimes overlooked. There are some procedures that could potentially involve pain or awkward positions and might be uncomfortable. But if we do a little bit of a deeper dive, we often can find ways to mitigate the pain or make it less uncomfortable. And I think what happens is we can sometimes tend to get stuck in the mode of this is the way we've always done it. But sometimes there's some really fantastic, innovative, creative minds in our industry that discover really cool new stuff. And a lot of times it is about reaching across the aisle, so to speak, and looking into other disciplines and seeing what they're doing, especially when I think about training for cooperation in medical behaviors or medical care. Sometimes if we look into the human world, we'll find that there's new things that are being developed to make it easier, maybe for doing medical care with human patients, children especially, and we'll find something that, that's going to really help us take care of animals. And so I think that's one of the ways we found out about the shot blocker, which is a nifty little device that basically works like via overshadowing to make it so that the insertion of the needle is less likely to be experienced by the animal. Although I will say one of the things that I've been finding just by having to give myself injections recently is that if you explore different locations to give injections, you'll find there's a lot of places where you won't even feel the needle go in. And of course, it also depends on, the size of the needle, the cut of the needle, the material the syringe or the needle is made out of. And of course, what you're injecting, the temperature. There are so many different factors to explore when we think about needle insertion and what is actually being injected. These are great conversations to have with your veterinary professional. So before we just make an assumption that something like an injection is absolutely going to hurt, keep in mind that it may not hurt at all, and there may be a lot of things you can do to make sure that it doesn't hurt. So we don't have to assume that something will be uncomfortable, and there may be a lot of things we can do so that it doesn't need to be uncomfortable at all. And this also goes for when we think about awkward positions. So instead of thinking, you know what, if I'm going to be doing some sort of hoof curl behavior and doing hoof care, and maybe it's not even hoof curl, maybe it's a different position. Does the animal need to hold that position for a long period of time in order to do whatever needs to be done? Could there be some other position? Can it be for small increments of time? We don't need to necessarily get stuck in only one visual picture of what that's going to look like. I often find that when people let go of there's only one way to do things and start thinking creatively, because maybe they have a particular animal that says, you know what, the way that it's always been done doesn't work for this animal. And they start getting creative and thinking about, well, what's going to work for my individual animal? We start discovering new methods that work well, that can be applied to other animals. And I think, and actually that reminds me of one of our goats presentations from Rachel Hughes from Frank Buck Zoo, who gave a wonderful shaping plan on training a bear to voluntarily swallow pills, very much like the way that people do, where the capsule was swallowed whole and then followed by a drink of Gatorade. And so, she really trained these bears with a great shaping plan. And I'll put a link to that in our episode notes. So that it was truly swallowing the pills, as opposed to, having to worry about, is the bear going to bite into the capsule and swallowing those pills whole. So again, it's these thinking outside the traditional way it's always been done. And you may find a new approach that is going to help a lot of different animals. So don't just assume it has to be done this way. We're going to make the animal uncomfortable. Start thinking outside the box, and you may find there's a new way to get there. And along those lines, this is where I always encourage people to focus on the process and not just the end goal. So if we're thinking, I've got to get this hoof trim done, or whatever procedure that may take a long time, that may require the animal being in some weird positions that potentially you start seeing the animal showing some signs of discomfort, and it wants to move and it wants to get out of the position. It's not about, I just got to get the trim done, or I've just got to get this procedure done. It's about making sure that animal is staying comfortable throughout the procedure. So if that means taking little breaks, or if it means allowing the animal to shift and readjust, that in the long run is going to help maintain that cooperation a lot better than just trying to get the job done as quick as possible. And I think anybody who's done nail trims on an animal should, probably has had this experience. If you just, rush to that, I got the nail trim done, it starts falling apart and the behavior starts breaking down, and you end up retraining the behavior over and over again. Same with injections, trying to sneak that injection in without really training the animal all the way through to compliance. You end up having to retrain the behavior over and over again. So again, focus on the process, not the end goal. So what I mean by focusing on the process is that the animal is staying calm and relaxed throughout the entire process. It's a voluntary participant, not, sort of halfway in, halfway out type of thing. We don't want that competing contingency thing where the animal's sort of hesitantly participating. We want this complete relaxed, comfortable participation, and all the way through to the end. If you're getting that hesitancy, that's telling you you've got competing contingencies, and so the animal's not really comfortable. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Time for your second secret word, and the secret word is lean, L-E-A-N. All right, let's get back to the program. Another strategy we can consider is also training for tolerance of discomfort, but we train it incrementally. So what does that mean? That means we are going to start with something that the animal can tolerate. So let's say you are thinking about injection training and the animal's like, and maybe they have had bad experiences with injections, and now you're trying to work up to the point of, okay, I want to be able to inject again. So you might have to start with something that doesn't even look like a syringe anymore because they've had such a bad experience. So you start with something that they will comfortably allow you to touch. And I've even had to go back to things like, I'm just going to start with a stick or a leaf. And then I gradually work up to maybe, a paper clip or something that's bent so that it looks like a wire. And then I might work up to a blunt needle that's not even attached, to the plastic part, to the part that delivers the medication. And then I might attach that to the syringe, to the plastic part, but then I might have to obscure that a bit. I might have to make it look different. And so you could gradually work up to that. And then you can actually gradually work up to different painful sensations and many different sensations, so that it's not just poking with something that feels kind of pokey and sharp. You may have to do different temperatures. You may do, wet and cold, all those kinds of things, so that the animal learns to, that allowing these different sensations, and I would try different locations as well, results in and good consequences. And then I think what would be really a fantastic test to see how well this your training actually works is to increase the degrees of freedom, is to also make sure that your desired outcomes that you're delivering are also available elsewhere for doing other behavior. So the animal could say, you know what, I'm happy to participate in all this, different sensation training, but I'm also, able to walk over here and do this behavior and get the same reinforcer. And if you can still get participation in your injection training while the animal still has the opportunity to go someplace else and get that reinforcer, I think that would be really amazing and a great example of what could be possible. And I know that for people is still sort of a new concept, but I think that would really be the direction that I would love to see training go. And again, we might have to start out with 0 degrees of freedom to get it started, but then you can open up those degrees of freedom afterwards, and that'll really say a lot about our training when the animals have the potential to get that same reinforcer someplace else. And it would really demonstrate that, wow, your training's really amazing. If the animal still wants to come over there and take that injection, but at the same time, it could go someplace else and get that same reinforcer someplace else. So I throw down the gauntlet for anyone who wants to go try that, because I think it would be really awesome. Okay, there you go. That is this week's podcast on training when things seem a little bit uncomfortable. And I hope it makes some sense to you, kind of ties in a little bit with some human behavior and, of course, some animal behavior. And it also ties in with our topic on animal training that transforms and measures emotional welfare, coming up at the European Association of Zoos and Aquarium Conference. And I hope to see you there. It's going to be a great conference, and I'm so excited to be talking about this topic that is just so important for what we do for animals and their welfare. All right, thank you again for joining me here on Animal Training Fundamentals, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.